Welcome to the corner at the bistro, while I sweat in my own house. Gosh.
It's okay, the fan's not on for audio purposes.
Oh, no, turn that on. We're fine.
Huh?
My audio good. We're good.
Okay. He said I can handle that in post.
We're good. Okay, so
through James Cameron.
I can't stand you. So
you got the Oprah shot, babe.
So this week we have July Thomas. So go ahead and try to. I'm awful at introductions.
I wish that could be at the end of my name.
July Thomas. It's like
I'm
a RuPaul's Drag Race. It's like a RuPaul's Drag Race segue.
I am dead. So we have July. We have July in the house with crew. So but yeah, this is what's going on this week. I figured we would just play a game of Uno and shoot the shit.
I got a lot of shoot to shit.
Yeah. Shit to shoot.
And shoot the shit.
And shoot the shit.
English is a hard language.
A mess. So
Spanish makes sense.
Yes, Spanish does make sense.
Romance.
No, romance languages make sense. English, on the other hand.
Bastard child.
Yeah, for real. Of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Latin,
French,
Dutch,
the
German.
German sentence structure.
Yeah.
I mean, what are we doing?
And we don't even have that nice accent like the British do. God damn it.
Where's their old
Something
accent?
happened. Is that my camera?
You're so silly. I can't.
I went to one of those events last night that was more candidates than people. I typically tend to avoid those events because it's just sort of a circle jerk. But I chose to go to this one because it was an environmental film festival also, and that's a cause that I support. So I went. And I had an interesting interaction with this woman who used to be on the city commission. Since losing her seat, she's largely checked out, which means that we haven't met yet. She was only there for the film festival. But she came to me and she said, "Hey, I saw that you're running, and I'm really happy. We really need people getting involved in this process," something to that effect. And it reminded me that when I launched back in February, that's how everyone inside the establishment greeted me. It's sort of the way that they just address also-rans and say, "Thank you for getting involved in the process, but I don't care really what you're doing." And I asked her if she's watched my videos. She said no, and I said, "You should." But the way that they address me now is like my opponent's campaign manager. He's the presumptive frontrunner. She came over, she offered me a job, and I politely turned it down. And then she said something that implied that she's hopeful that I only come in third place because there's another guy in the race who she wants to run up against in the general. She thinks she'll have an easier time with. And I guess the point of these two stories is that, one, the only thing that's holding me back at all is people not knowing who I am, because two, once the people in the establishment get to know me, they realize they can't beat me.
We don't have candidates that are straight up just walking around and giving out information to people. That shit just like doesn't happen.
Right. That right there.
And it's something original, and it's something like I feel like people my age appreciate, people that like just want something different appreciate. So just really just like thank you for taking time out of your day to come and fucking sit around with us.
Yeah, no,
honestly.
for real.
Because we very much appreciate what it is you're doing.
Well, same. I mean, that's why it's worth it, for me to come be here with y'all. I mean, the videos that you, I've seen some of your videos, especially takes on like trans history and talking about medicalization and like pathologization of trans identity and that type of shit is like stuff that needs to be said out loud, but that conversation is kind of only starting to happen, and it's there are people who feel like they don't belong in the community because that conventional narrative doesn't fit them, and it's just very important that information is getting out there. So thank you.
No. Thank
Should
you.
we
I want. Oh,
let's
let's continue pushing it out. Let's definitely continue pushing all of this information out because, like you said, it needs to be out there. People need to know about this.
Yeah.
There are just so many different stories and narratives that the government and just our government are in control of. There are so many different industries that are in control of our own personal narratives, and we need to kind of take that back. We need to take our own narratives back.
Yeah, especially the way that they get like paired up, right? So they'll like carve out any part that is threatening to the power structure, and you'll get like a little bit. You get 80% of the story, so you feel like you know the history, and then you're like, wait, but who did the firebombing on Fifth Ave back in the 60s? And then you start to pull that back, and you're like, oh wait, okay, there's other stuff here that has been maybe forgotten or maybe intentionally forgotten.
That intentional part. That intentional part, y'all.
Yeah.
That intentional part.
And they don't teach us about like this stuff in schools, especially like the stuff related to specifically Florida history. Like I feel like specifically in this state, they love to put on a show about loving Florida history and love teaching Florida history, but then like they really go very shallow baseline with it. They don't really go to the depth. They don't talk about the shit at all.
Which is why it's interesting we're talking about that like civic center, whatever the thing that they're calling the like Republican Re-Education Center at the University of Florida. That's why it's so interesting to me, is because like I was at my like most centrist the day I finished undergrad at UF. That was when I was like, I worked my ass off and picked myself up by my bootstraps and worked full time.
Yeah.
That was when I was like farthest right I've ever been in my life. Was the day that I finished my Florida education, right? And then I started working. I was like, nope, never mind. I'm going back.
Labor is entitled to all it creates.
Yeah.
No, so what did you get your degree in at UL?
So my undergraduate degree was bachelor's in mathematics, and then I came back, got a master's in physics, and have 6/7 of a PhD in physics. Currently on a leave of absence. May or may not go back and write the dissertation after this is over. The way I sort of see it is like, okay, I could write, the dissertation is a book, right? So I could write that book. There are other books I want to write.
Right.
How many years do I have left? I might go back and write that book and get that degree, but I'm inevitably not going to use that degree for anything anyway, so I'm not going to do it just to get the degree, but I got things to say. You know the weird
rocket scientist.
Yeah, right. No, that's what I was like,
I was
excuse
just
me?
about to say,
Wait.
Not
Did not know this whatsoever. What in the world?
I can't make anything fly.
But you can make it disappear. So you're a magician.
That's awesome. Wow. Yeah. That just blew me away. That's so I love just hearing all of our different interests and degrees and things like that. That is wild. That's
What was your undergraduate degree?
mine was English. So I started off in music. I was a vocal major my freshman year, but I only knew I didn't know my fundamentals. I grew up learning in church, and I did not know anything else. And I came to Preview, and I got accepted initially to the College of Journalism because I was on the school newspaper, and Dr. B, music professor, heard me singing. We got to shooting the shit. He was like, you should come out like the next month to come try out and see if you like be accepted into the vocal school. And I came back up, tried out, got accepted. I was weighing on my motherfucking head, child. I was weighing over my head, child. I was so in over my head. I was a deer in the headlights. I just felt like everyone knew way more than I did, but I had a good voice. So I kind of survived off of that for a year. And then we were just like, Dr. B, I don't think I want to do this. My interests are elsewhere. I love writing. I love research. I love music. I love music, but I don't want to do I don't think I want to do music as my degree. So went our separate ways. Ended up doing English. So long story short, we're back around. I have a degree in English and mass communications as a minor and communication studies as another minor.
So
And
research and media focused.
research and media focus, and I also I concentrated in undergrad in cultural, gender, and queer studies. So I never thought that we would be having the trans conversation this early on in our society. I never thought that we would be having gender theory conversations this early on in our society. We don't talk about racism. So I was just like, wait, when those things started to become more mainstream and actually talked about and acknowledged, I was just like, wow, I didn't think we were actually going to like be here this fast. And now that we're here and we're seeing the backlash, I'm just like, oh yeah, this is history repeating itself. It's just history repeating itself. So yeah, that's a long about way. That's my degree. English, mass communication, communication studies. I'm sorry,
He has a
y'all.
degree in talking about
I'm
shit,
very
clearly.
I'm very long-winded. I'm very long-winded, child. Very long-winded. I'm so sorry. So,
He
but
knows how
yeah.
to talk all that shit. Too much of it, apparently.
Como le gusta hablar mierda.
That.
Yeah.
See, my
that.
other one was linguistics instead of the
Yeah.
communication.
Yes.
That's so important.
Yes. Oh, I wanted to do linguistics.
I feel like people sleep on linguistics a lot.
Mhm.
It was fun. I loved it.
Learning where words come from is just as important as, because I feel like you can decipher a lot of meaning from doing that too.
Oh, but there's so much more than that. It's also like language and gender, and then like bilingualism, how your actual brain computes language. I mean, there's so many different little micro fields of linguistics.
I love this so much.
Damn,
love this
I would love to
movie.
sit here for a conversation on linguistics.
Yeah, no, seriously, I
We can hang out whenever.
I love
Like,
this.
for real.
I love this.
Okay.
I love this so much. I really, really do love this, y'all. Y'all really have no understanding how much I'm adoring this right now. So, no, where I didn't really have. Let's start playing Uno.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Have y'all ever played Uno?
Yeah. Have you ever played Uno?
Not since I was a kid. So.
Oh,
Either
okay.
match on color or number.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna deal like 7 cards.
I don't know why we're not willing to acknowledge the fact that landlords do not do labor. Simply, they take money away from the working class through passive income. And when we look at this specific ordinance that they're talking about, which is the Renters' Right Ordinance, I actually did get into it with Jeremiah Tattersall over this because I did oppose it. And I opposed it for a simple reason, which is that over the last 10 years, there's been a consolidation of rental properties in this city. There are a few large landlords who collect the properties of smaller slumlords when they get out of the business, and those landlords are worse than the small-time landlords. But the issue is that the small-time landlords have no interest in selling to the single families who would like to live in those homes because they can make more by bundling the properties together and selling them to the larger landlords. And then you have people like Alligator Realty who are unresponsive and do not do the repairs that they should be doing. And it doesn't matter what ordinance you've implemented, because at the end of the day, the landlord who is collecting the properties is shitty at the job. We need to take steps to decommodify housing. We need to take homes. We're going to have rental properties because we have a college in the city, but we need to figure out a way for those folks who do want to live here, who want a home, we need to figure out a way to get us into these rental properties, take them off the rental market. Now you have people living in a home who care about the home, who are going to put the work into it to keep it up and ensure that it can be passed on to future generations.
July, what got you into running for mayor?
Yeah, so I mean, I had thought about it for a while. You know, I came to UF, and you hear all the things about, like, it's a liberal...
to do this again.
Coño!
Damn!
Wait, can I play this?
No.
No.
Look, when we play dominoes, I'll beat you. I'll throw them at you.
Yeah,
I'll
not
throw it
competitive.
at you.
But yeah, so it got to UF. I guess you're sort of expecting one sort of, it's like this liberal mecca in the South.
Mhm.
And then, of course, you get to UF and you're like, oh,
No.
not that.
If only it was that.
Yeah. So I worked around, like, just off campus and kind of spent time at UF. And then I finished and I was like, all right, fine. Like, I got a degree. My intention was always to go somewhere where I could, like, safely transition. And growing up, it was like, you gotta New York or San Francisco, right? That's what they always said.
Right.
So I was sort of like getting ready to do that, and I still had a couple months left on my lease, and I was just sort of hanging out around downtown, and then just sort of stumbled upon, these punk kids who were all doing all of the work. Even at times when there's no one in their spaces that needed them to, they're holding each other accountable for shit. Having a lot of like hard conversation, and none of them had a lot of money. Most of them had moved here for school, but weren't fortunate enough to have the job that I was in undergrad. So they eventually had to like drop out and couldn't get through their school, and now they're just sort of kicking it around downtown. And so that made me feel safe enough to transition and maybe really actually fall in love with this place, right? And now it's, what is it, 8 years later? And, those people have fought a lot of fights for me. So when they started coming out and they're like, please, 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 you have to do it. We've never had anyone like from our community actually step up to do this. And I was like, true, but I'd always said that I wouldn't run if there were a Black Gainesvillian running. Like as a white person who moved here, I'm not going to perpetuate the erasure of the Black history that built this town by, thinking like, oh yes, you can run, but I'm going to be better.
Right.
Which is what we have right now.
Right.
Through that fucking commission.
Child.
And so it was when specifically Gail Johnson reached out to me and asked me personally to run.
Wow.
I was like, shit, Gail, I fucking follow you, the goddamn sun, like if you think that I should be doing it, that gave me sort of the confidence that I wasn't stepping out of line and doing it, and that I can actually, make a difference for the Black community as well. And really, it's just all of the there's different marginalized communities that tend to exist in similar spaces, but they're actually not very well integrated. It's always been a sort of a complaint of mine, and even just in the last year or two, that's started to change a little bit.
Right.
The one that I always sort of point to is like How Bizarre. I know when to put them on the spot.
Yes,
How Bizarre
yes,
cannot
yes.
carry this entire city on their back.
That.
But to go into a space that's downtown, that's like an art space, right? So there are people from the downtown art community, which has historically been very white, who enter into that space. But there are also a lot of young Black kids working on art who don't just go there to pass through, but hang out there, spend time there. They feel safe there. It's their space. Every time I go in there, I'm just like, shit, okay.
Yes,
right.
no, same.
No,
same,
it's sort of cool.
Same. We have that same feeling every time.
Yeah.
Every time. So yeah.
And it's it's exciting. I mean, it's very easy to, the old cliches. Everyone always says they miss the old Gainesville. Their old Gainesville is whatever Gainesville moved here in the first. Dude, I fucking love Gainesville right now where it is.
Yes.
I love where it is.
Yes.
I do see that there are people who want to turn it into Fort Lauderdale and shit. And and that's taken me a long time. That finally clicked for me last week. And these people in charge always it's always bugged me that they don't seem to really like Gainesville. I was talking. The guy asked me not to repeat this, but I'm probably gonna do it anyway. I'll just say there was a friend of one of the current city commissioners, and he told me that they were hanging out one time, and he asked him why he had voted a certain way on something, and the city commissioner said to him, "Well, Gainesville's not special." And it's like, damn, okay, that's how y'all act. But it's never. But it took me a while to
Public
understand
service.
why then why are you involved at all if you don't think Gainesville's that special?
Right.
What finally clicked to me is that these people were born here. They have the connections that they have here, and those connections are only as valuable as the real estate market
Right.
and
Yeah.
the corporations that are coming in that they can do deals with.
And then get out to their bigger job.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. They're
Or
just
get out
trying
to
to
their
grow
big
the,
pig. Yeah.
It's a
you know,
stepping stone.
the
Mhm.
connections that we build when we come here for school and meet people in the community, and we build connections that rival theirs, but it took them their whole lives to build those
Right.
connections.
That,
Right.
We talked about this
that.
the
They
other
think
night.
like
It's like we chose
when I'm like, you want to live in Austin, Texas, move to Austin, Texas. What they think is, I can't build these connections in Austin. I have to do what I can to turn this into Austin.
Right.
That finally clicked for me. I don't know what you do with that,
Yeah.
but it's important that once you recognize people who view this place that way,
Mm-hmm.
all their votes start to make sense.
Yep. 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 Yep.
In the 1980s, the city services of fire, police, and waste refused to enter black neighborhoods in Gainesville. Things got so bad that in porters' quarters, they had to gather up all their garbage and take it to an empty lot on the edge of the neighborhood. That lot eventually became Lynch Park on Main Street, if you're curious. In order to restore police service, the work to do that came from a young black deputy who began working on a model of community-oriented policing. It was very unpopular with his fellow police officers on the force. He ended up leaving in the 90s and only came back in the 2000s when he was offered the chief of police job. But even then, he was still unpopular. I found this letter to the editor of the Gainesville Sun. I probably couldn't find it again because I think it was on a server that I wasn't supposed to be on. But it was a white officer whose father had been chief of police in the 50s. And I would categorize this letter to the editor as rank. But the point here is that Tony Jones, who's that chief, who by the way only retired last month, had built up quite a good amount of goodwill, and the community had worked really hard with him, which is why when we called in to defund the police in 2020, we kind of looked like we had our pants around our ankles, because the black leaders in the community called in support of Tony Jones. And the point here is just that when you're doing this type of work, it's important to know who the leaders are in the community that you're advocating for, and that sometimes, even if you don't agree with them, you gotta shut up, listen, and follow.
I saw one of your recent reels talk about the relationship of Gainesville and the local police, and Tony Jones. Just the building of that relationship over the years and the decades took a lot of time and a lot of care and whatever, so forth and so on. And how once everything happened with George Floyd and defund police started to come up, and we had that city commission. I remember that city commission meeting, that city.
Mhm.
Yeah, I remember that meeting.
Okay, yeah, they all called in for Riker.
Yeah. I forgot how much that relationship between Gainesville police and specifically the black community has like gotten somewhat better throughout the years, and especially with Tony Jones, but with everything else that was going on in the country, it's such a touchy subject. I don't know how to navigate that at all. I really don't know how to navigate that whatsoever. But I saw that reel, and that just touched something in me. Just to think about Gainesville and the community and the relationship with police, and how if Gainesville experiencing that, there are other places around the country that's also experiencing that or had experienced that as well. So I don't know where I was going with that. But I wanted to bring it up because I watched it, and I just remember that. I remember that, and I remember having those mixed emotions even then, getting on that call and listening, and then just so
I think my immediate reaction, to be totally honest, was like, oh, we got bamboozled, like Tony Jones just out-organized us or something like that. Like, oh, rats, they really, we'll get them next time. And, oh, these people who are calling in don't even know what's good for them. And it's like, holy shit, I'm doing the white liberal thing in my fucking brain on this call. And that's why I had to, like, look into it and, like, okay, wait, who is Tony Jones? Like, where does he come from? It took me a few months to, you just get deep into archives and stuff. I mean, the only stuff that really exists is oral histories. But you dig into that stuff and you start to realize, like, oh, okay. We were in over our heads a little bit. But it's good. I'm happy that we did that call, because then we wouldn't have known who Tony Jones was or what the Black community was sort of striving for, and it helped us sort of build that connection. It's like, you know, it's there's always got to be forward momentum in that. It's a weird one right now, because now I'm like, in a way, running to be a coworker of every police officer in the city. Years of having a policy of like personally never talking to police about anything without a lawyer present.
Right.
So that's been sort of a weird thing to figure out. Like, okay, what is actually the proper way to sort of set myself up? You know, not politically, but like, how am I actually going to interact with those people? That's my job too, you know. I think it'll take on a different. I mean, I've already started that, so it's now I have started when it's been a policy of mine for years. If I see a police officer talking to a Black person, I stop, and rarely does anything ever happen. There have been many times where I could hear shouting from the police officer. And then when I pulled up and stood there, the police officer said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm just here for them."
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, here's your license. All right, that has happened several times, especially around downtown. And it's, you know, not going to get into specifics on why that happens or anything like that.
No. Yeah.
But I've started, instead of just being like, I'm here for them, and then seeing if they need help with anything once a police officer goes, started trying to introduce myself to a police officer, get their card, understand why they're making the stop, and sort of get a little more involved on that level. But everybody always wants to ask about crime.
Right.
And I had an interview with a reporter the other day, and I was like, all right, I'm going to answer this one for real. What are we talking about when we talk about crime?
Come on.
We're talking about wage theft? Are we talking about white collar crime? Are we talking about frat boys at the university buying and selling drugs?
Come on.
Or are we talking specifically about Black youth who have been dispersed by gentrification geographically, so they can only gather together in certain areas within the city core, and they're like parking lot partying, whatever, because that's the only place that they have to go, because the community resources to fund, you know, community centers and things don't exist. And on top of that, they've been dispersed, so they don't even have a geographic community center anymore. So they gather there, and then, you know, you run into different business owners who are at different sort of like levels of comfort, and it doesn't always cut the way you want. I mean, one of the bars that Black people feel the most safe hanging out in downtown consistently is owned by a Fox News watching Republican, and then you have like the liberal tattoo bar owners, and they get you can see them get kind of uncomfortable. And it's just that's always been strange to me. But anyway, I digress. When they talk about crime, I always want to know like which crime.
Going back to that bar thing, it's even weird going to queer spaces like that, because like even the like most well-known oldest queer spaces aren't always Black friendly. University Club.
I had a really funny one. I don't know if this will be. Fuck it. The election's in a week. So there's one. Okay, there's one other queer candidate in any of the races. He's in one of the other, just like one of the district races for the city commission. And I was like, it's weird. Like I know this guy because he posts a lot of housing takes that I kind of disagree with, just because they're sort of the like neoliberal YIMBY movement thing. They're not, you know, they don't consider class or race in any of their like, housing takes. So that's the only place I knew the guy, but I also knew that he was gay. I was like, I can't understand why. He's a little bit older. He's probably, you know, somewhere in his 30s, maybe like early 40s. Like, I should have run across him at some point. Why have I never seen him in any space? And I finally met him. I was like, I want to introduce myself. You know, I'm like the only other queer person. Like, what's up, girl? You know, like do that thing.
Yeah.
And
hey, mamas. Yeah. We all do it. We
do.
Queer to queer nonverbal communication. There needs to be a fucking study on it. There needs to be a fucking study on it. No.
Anyway, I'm chatting with him, and then I realized that he's like on some leadership board for UC, and I was like, oh,
okay.
That's right. There's different.
Yeah.
There's Gay Gainesville and queer Gainesville.
Gainesville.
Very rarely come together.
That's
real.
such a
That's a great way to put
that's
that.
a
That's a
great
great way to put
yes,
that.
yes.
That's a great way to put that.
Yes.
That's a great way to put that.
Child.
I'm glad that you fucking said that.
Yeah, that is a great way to put that.
That makes
wow.
me really happy.
Wow.
I know this is sort of going back a conversation, but like sort of going back to how you're like preparing to enter this political space potentially, and like having to form coalitions with people that like you previously said like you don't even want to like align and have conversations with. In your opinion, experience, how do you feel like we should go about having conversations with these kind of people in our lives? Where does this conversation like sort of start? What I guess do you suggest? Where should we start building these coalitions?
Yeah, so this is kind of another piece of the puzzle of how I got as involved as I did. Was that I in 2016, when we were collectively like, the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
There were people who decided like they're gonna dedicate all their time just like getting online and like and just going after the people at the very top. And I was sitting there like, man, like how much fucking different would it have been if Hillary was there anyway?
Yeah.
Which isn't to say it wouldn't have been different. I'm not saying there's
No.
But just thinking like how much of a difference can you actually make pushing there? And so I started thinking about the difference between like top down versus bottom up. And like everyone always tells me, you have this impression of the world because you live in a bubble. And I was like, okay, then what if I just make my bubble bigger? How much can I blow it up? You know, that's sort of, so the time since 2016 has been about that, like talking to the people
making
in my
the bubble
bubble.
bigger.
Getting the bubble people, squashing beef with your bubble people.
Squashing
It doesn't mean everyone's going to agree on
Right.
everything.
Right.
That's where a lot of conversations start, right? It's like, all right, Brad and Tiffany are having a fight. Get together. Let's see.
Let's talk about the Brad and Tiffany of it all.
Right.
I agree.
Right.
That, you know, to just sort of like put it aside because we all have to, you know, work in the same kitchen, hang out in the same show space or
whatever sphere that is, because there are levels to this shit. There are different operating spaces, but like I think that's excellent. Yeah.
Starting there, and then and that's sort of, I think we've sort of personally, I've hit a point in my bubble where I'm like, okay, the bubble has grown somewhat. Doesn't mean that there aren't people inside the bubble who, you know, I don't get along with entirely, but you can be a comrade without being a homie.
Right. Exactly. Come on. Wait. Say it from the audience in the back. Say it from the people in the back.
Right.
Because
So that's, you know, this election in some ways is about that too. Like taking that bubble, like, okay, can we just stretch it over the city?
Right.
And what do we do?
Right.
I love that.
That's how you are. Ron DeSantis is gonna hate that shit.
Yep.
Make him shit himself.
It's not a reason to vote for me. But if your only reason for voting is because you hate Ron DeSantis, there's no better candidate in your life.
Let's snap to that, y'all. Let's snap to
I
that.
personally live on a lot of hatred.
Yes. I love being petty.
I must breathe and drink hatred for Ron DeSantis.
I love being petty to these bigots out here. So hey.
Thank you.
They want us to leave.
Yeah, no, they really
That's
do.
True.
I've just been so stubborn from the day I was born.
Yes.
You stubborn.
I love it.
100 years ago, if you would have hopped on Archer Road and driven out of Gainesville towards Cedar Key, you would have come across a town called Rosewood. It was a majority black town, and it neighbored a white town called Sumner. Now, it was burned to the ground 99 years ago in an episode that came to be called the Rosewood Massacre. It started, as a lot of these things do, with a false accusation of the rape of a white woman by a black man, his lynching. But then in the days that followed, white men showed up in droves from around the area, white men that nobody knew, and they chased every black person they could find out, or they murdered them, and they burned Rosewood to the ground and wiped it off the face of the map, literally. Now, the interesting thing about that is that was the first week of January 1923. New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1922, the KKK held a rally in Gainesville to protect white women, where they marched through the historic black neighborhoods. And while I've never been able to directly attach the men who were in that rally to the men who showed up out of nowhere in Rosewood to burn it to the ground, what I do know is that at the time, the mayor of Gainesville, George S. Waldo, he was a proud Klansman. The chief of police, his father-in-law, was also a Klansman. Even the editor of the Gainesville Sun was a Klansman. So that's why whenever I meet a white person in town who brags about how their family's been here for generations, I like to ask them, how many generations?
So so where did you grow up? Did you grow up in Florida or?
Yeah, I grew up in Orlando.
Okay.
So I grew up in a suburb of Orlando that was built in like the early 2000s housing boom, and then collapsed to like 60% vacancy in the 08 recession. And then before it really came back, I moved up here. So that was sort of the world that I grew up in, was like, everything is very manufactured. There was like no sense of history, no sense of place. They would like drain, I didn't find this out until later, but there was like a pond that had been there in aerial footage going as far back to like 1930. Like, it's just a pond that was there when it was a field. And they drained the pond to put a retention pond around it. I just always found that weird. Like, that's how manufactured that environment was. We couldn't just keep the pond that exists because of something to do with runoff retention and shit. So we're going to build another pond. Anyway, that's the type of place that I grew up in. And then I moved here. And all of the cool things here, every space that I stepped into that was cool, it was like, damn, this building has like 150-year-old bricks in it. It's been something, and then it was something, and it was something. And so, so it's that like shift in perspective that really endeared me to Gainesville initially.
I fell in love with a lot of the old Florida architecture up here too.
Same. I fell in love. At first, I didn't like the slower lifestyle. Being from Miami, I didn't like it at first. But I love it. I love the old Florida, like the old Georgia. I love my trees with moss. Like I love that. I love nature. I love nature, and that's why I feel like we get up here in like North.
I feel like we're
Central
in it
Florida.
I feel like
we
we're
get.
really in it. Especially the approximation to all the springs. Like, I feel like just very connected to like the heart of Florida right here. To be like nature woo, but
no.
I mean, you could take a walk out of this apartment and without even really thinking about it, in like 10 minutes, just be on some old road.
Yes, that
with the big oaks and the moss.
Yes.
And it'll be 10 degrees cooler than the 4-lane highway you have to walk across to get there. But it is a slower speed, and it kind of demands you slow down. And then once you do, you're like, oh yeah.
I like this.
I do.
It's a vibe. No, okay, it's a vibe. And then when you're able to find a sense of community as well, it's definitely a vibe. I know. Yeah, I understand. Like Gainesville and the people that like Gainesville and everything. So, how was it growing up queer and growing up trans in Orlando?
So I grew up. That neighborhood that I grew up in was actually interesting because it was way outside of Orlando, right on the cusp of a place called Bistro, which is like old country. So it's like this brand new neighborhood right next to the old country area, and it actually was I guess relatively affordable in areas. So even though it was like a sort of a golf course, like gated community,
right.
The way the economics worked out was that it was like pretty like middle class, and because it was built in the late 90s, early 2000s, there ended up being some like pockets of diversity. So like I grew up, we had moved there from Cleveland, Ohio. My parents were like very conservative at the time and fundamentalist Christian. So like that, you can imagine how it was being.
That sounds like Ohio.
But just so happened to land on a block where there were, like, across the street was a black family. A few doors down from them was a multi-generational black family. And so, my like little white conservative ass was out there running my mouth all the time and getting hit. And I look back. I mean, I thank them all since then. Every time I see them, I'm like, thank you for fucking. That's how you have to handle stuff when you're that age. But it definitely made me, stop and think about a lot of the beliefs that have been ingrained in me. And also, almost everyone on that block ended up being gay when we grew up.
Look at that.
So it was like this first queer community.
Oh my god.
And it was
I
just
love
like
that.
playing tag in the streets.
That's kind of cool. Wait, that's awesome. Wait, okay,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, my biggest regret though is that none of us came out until after we all moved away.
Right.
And it sucked. And we were like shitty about it to each other too. I
Damn.
look at that a lot and I'm just like, fuck, like what could we have had if instead of being so like guarded in our own identities that we were lashing out at each other and like, so
That's a question. That's a deep question
It's
for
a
the community
complicated-
too. That's
Yeah.
a deep question for the. That's really because we do lash out at each other,
mm,
and it comes from. Obviously, we know where it comes from. So
the internalized.
yeah. So. Oh,
An important conversation.
it's a very important conversation. We definitely need more conversations like that in queer spaces because
Well, Naples is that kind of town. Like Naples is like the like show it off, like keeping it up with the Joneses kind of town of Florida, where like everybody's just paper, like everybody's just fake. So like same kind of vibes. Like everybody just didn't know who the fuck they were. So like everybody was just like stumbling around and hurting everybody else while they were trying to deal with their trauma and figure it out. You know. And like I really resonated with what you said. Like I wonder what we could have had if like we took that time, you know, to like find ourselves and stop lashing out on each other. That's some real ass shit.
No.
That's some real shit.
No, but it's still cool and good to have that sense of community growing up as well. Like that's still really cool. Like, even though you all didn't come out at the time, but still to have that sense of community, I think
That's true, because
really
going back
good.
and reflecting on it now, I'm sure
There's
a lot.
And I mean, and the thing is, I am very grateful to have continued. You know, I'm 31 now, and I still have relationships with people that I met when I was 8 years old.
That's
So it's
awesome.
like we are still.
Yes.
Like when I go to New York, I hit them up.
Yes.
And follow along on all their stuff, and every now and then I'll just get a phone call. Hey, I just need to talk about this thing. You know, it's like, all right.
I love that. No. I wish we all could have that kind of like sense of community with people that we grew up with. So
yeah.
No, because I have similar relationships too with a few people, childhood friends and people I grew up with. So and that helps. That does a lot. That's having someone or a group of people that knows exactly what you went through, where you were from, and kind of understand you as well, I think is very key and very instrumental in a lot of lives. I like that. That's awesome. I'm glad that you got to experience that.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. No.
It's I think I had a therapist recently say to me, I was trying to explain like community. I was like, I'm pissed because there's just people. Everybody uses the word community, but it doesn't mean the same thing to everyone.
Right.
Some people
Yes.
are talking
Right.
about a
Right.
suburb, which ironically I was just talking about a suburban community, but a queer community within a suburban community is not usually what they're talking about. They're usually talking about like their neighbor who doesn't mow their lawn enough, so they call the HOA on them or whatever, and they're like, that's my community. And
It's all context.
and the term that she used that was really helpful, she said, yeah, they don't know anything about community for survival.
Ooh,
It's like, oh,
yes, I love that. Okay,
Because that,
yeah,
when you need it,
that,
when you need it,
that's a totally
then
different.
Then it gets messier. You're way more in each other's business.
Mm-hmm.
And it's out from the outside. It's like, wow, those like catty gossiping gays. It's like, no, I gotta be in their shit.
Right.
Because, you know, they're the ones, I don't know. I don't know why that
What
is.
you would do with that?
But
No,
it's like,
but that's just I'm thinking of any marginalized community.
Right.
That goes, that goes on. No.
Like
It's
when we
almost like
met, we were both
checking
like,
notes.
oh, we're both from Miami.
Yeah.
Same
Because we,
thing.
And you both compared Miami notes. You
Yeah,
both were like,
yeah.
no, like
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Yes.
actually gossip
Check.
is a fundamental thing that's come up because people need to know information to survive. Like gossip shouldn't be this thing that's tainted or catty or a fucking sin, whatever. Sorry, I cursed.
Child, if you
But A gossip is this
Have
thing
been cursing
that
all on.
actually allowed people to have safety.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things where I think it actually like chemically releases like oxytocin or some sort of endorphin where you like actually bond with the person. But it's like, this might be a secret that will save your life because it saved my life.
That. And I hate that it's gotten such a negative connotation.
Same.
Well,
It's
I mean, whisper networks were like, especially going back to, you know, like before like the female liberation movement, whisper networks are like literally the way that women kept each other alive, and it was also a way that they exerted power, which is, you know, you look at that and compare it to you know, like the criminal justice system and how everything had to be like so like regimented and formalized. It was like, well, technically he was found not guilty, so you got to stop talking about it. And it's like, okay, yeah, but maybe there's a difference between being found not guilty and being worthy of scrutiny.
Right.
There's
Come
some
on.
distance there, right?
Come on.
There are levels to this shit. Always levels to this shit.
No,
There
there
are
really
always
are.
levels to this
There are
shit.
always levels. No.
But
Yeah.
I think a lot about, especially those types of community, like survival-based communities, right? And how I think that in some, there's some sense in which we are, I think capitalists want to drive us away from those communities. And I think when we talk about like displacement with gentrification as like a symptom of gentrification, I think of it a lot of times as like an actual like goal of gentrification is if you have a community where people take care of each other, they don't need to buy shit from capitalists. But if you take them all and move them out to the outer suburb, like, you know, or the inner ring suburbs or outer ring suburbs, and then you replace their homes with this vertical tower that is in essence another suburb, right? Those towers that they build in the middle of the town, those people are oftentimes in there for like a year and out. They're very rarely making contact with one another, and the buildings are set up in such a way that they'll never come into contact with their neighbors, which is why the hallways are always so impersonal and cold, and like you just want to get out of the hallways because God forbid you ever meet a neighbor and share anything.
Dad, come on.
We need you to hop on Amazon Prime to order whatever.
Ooh.
You know.
Ooh.
That's some British shit.
Ooh.
So yeah, I think about the community a lot as like a.
I literally pictured like the standard and like all the student
Yeah.
housing and
Yeah.
like all the soulless like like you really took me there like
The heavy metal
Yeah.
doors, like on a like after a stairwell.
no like
Yeah.
a goddamn Stanley Kubrick
Yeah.
film
Yeah.
like literally The Shining like
Yeah.
Shiny.
come and play with us, Danny. Come and play with us. Like realness.
I can't.
Like the flickering light in the haunted hospital.
Yeah. And,
You
oh,
know,
child.
Like that has more personality though than the
Yeah.
standard.
Yeah, that does.
Not much, but
Wow.
Did
some.
y'all know that there are bats and shins?
Yeah.
They're just animals. The building is so old that like they're just straight up like nests.
They
of,
live in the
like-
stadium too.
Yeah.
It's also like not worth it to them to like go and like try to like mess with it because it'd be way too much work.
Let the best be the best. Let them,
That's what I'm
let them
saying.
let their best
I'm pro
lives.
bat.
We're yeah, like
It's like
we're in their
Hogwarts or
space. We're in their space.
Exactly.
So like let them live their lives. No.
Fuck you, J.K. Rowling.
I had a really rough 2-week stretch. You remember that 2-week stretch when I was like texting you every day? I think I called just to like yell about something that I was really
Oh.
pissed about.
You're more than welcome.
I was just like really going through it. Like I feel like this whole process I've kind of felt like a chrysalis. Where
Mhm.
like I feel like I've regressed in some ways as
Mhm.
a person, but it's because I'm like struggling to be reborn in some ways.
Yeah.
This was like a microcosm of that. It was like 2 awful weeks, and then I went to work, and it was like, you know, I clock in around sunset, and I went to work and I wasn't feeling great, and I like grabbed some coffee, some APM coffee.
Mm-hmm.
I went out back and sat on the picnic table and looked up, and the sun was setting, and there were bats just like swooping in front of the like orange Florida sunset.
Nice.
So cool.
That's
I
nice.
love
And
that.
I just like tears.
Yeah. Oh.
And I was just
Angel
like,
tears.
right now,
Cries in Gainesville.
I feel
Yeah,
good.
like-
Yes.
It feels good to be alive when it
Yes.
happens in some time.
Yeah.
So I
Really
love
wanna
every
go to
time
the
I see the
houses.
bats.
Oh.
It is such a Gainesville thing to have.
That
the
is.
houses and the-
It really is
and
a
also they
Gainesville
eat the
thing.
mosquito. Like if we didn't have the bats,
Thank
you think the mosquitoes are bad? No.
Come on, come on, come on, come on. I remember, I think that was one of the first things I did as an undergrad here when I came up here was go to the bat observatory and then just learn more about the bats in the area. I was like, oh, this is really, really fucking cool. Like, what? So yeah, no, that's yeah. I had a good Gainesville cry this past weekend too, so I understand. Gainesville's tears or something else, child. There's something else, child.
A Painsbury sunset.